Hey, welcome, folks. This is Jeff Nyquist. I'm here with you with another edition of Update Brazil, and with me is my co-host Italo Lorenzon and Diana West, our special guest. Diana, good morning.
Good morning. Good to be with you both.
Yes, we are going to be talking about fake news, of course, and the fake news has got to do about Donald Trump, the president-elect, and the preparations that are being made to I guess, is it today or tomorrow that the electors officially vote, Diana?
It is December 18th, which is, no, it must be today. I'm not sure. Now I don't hear Jeff. Let me see here.
Yeah, it was at the beginning of this week, I think. But anyway, there's been such a hullabaloo about this stuff with the Russians influencing the election and the electors having questions, and then the CIA and the FBI getting involved in the act. It's really quite a circus, and some of your friends and my friends who follow this closely are skeptical about these claims about the Russian intelligence influencing the election.
Yes, very skeptical. In fact, I would say that this is another one of these golden opportunities to see where people stand, how people react to this kind of provocation. I call it provocation. I think that the fake news industry at this point, which seems to be anonymous CIA sources, possibly John Brennan himself, the director, with the lead vehicle being Jeff Bezos's Washington Post. This seems to be the tip of the spear in the framing of the election of Donald Trump as a Russian plot, as a conspiracy based on exactly no evidence, just hearsay, just anonymous sourcing. Now we have John Brennan's name on it. Lately, we've been seeing the controversy that seemed to be behind the scenes with Director of National Intelligence Clapper having told Congress, I believe it was, that no, he did not see evidence of Russian influence in the election and in terms of creating the victory of Donald Trump. And also FBI Director Comey's name has been trotted out now on the say-so of John Brennan, that they now agree with him that Donald Trump's election was essentially delivered to us on a Russian plate. This is one of the most bizarre news cycles to live through. And I'm very interested in kind of going through step by step with you how this seemed to come about and what it really may mean. Here we are with this enormous story that is focusing a number of analysts, all the punditry, it seems, the Democrats in Congress, the establishment Republicans in the persons of Senator John McCain, I believe Lindsey Graham, some others that are now calling for the same Russian hacking of Donald Trump's victory to come before more investigation. It's a very strange moment. I think, number one, we can say that this is an effort to influence the electors who meet to validate the election of Donald Trump in our electoral college. And then my first question will be, after I think that will happen, I do believe it will happen, I don't believe this will have much effect on the outcome of the electoral college meeting. However, will it continue on? Will we see this continue on as a larger effort to delegitimize Donald Trump's presidency? And that, I think, I would guess it will continue.
Well, I guess my first question is, how did the Russians supposedly influence the election? I mean, they didn't mess with the votes, right? I mean, the vote count was right.
Right. Well, this is a very good question, because it is never really asked or even broached in terms of a larger, more focused, more meaty discussion. What their story is that the Russians hacked the DNC computers, hacked John Podesta, Hillary Clinton's campaign chairman's emails, and released them, thereby causing the election of Donald Trump. Now, we don't know the source of these emails other than through WikiLeaks. WikiLeaks' Julian Assange has emphatically denied that he was given these emails by any state actor. We have the statement of an associate of his who does not speak for WikiLeaks. Assange has been very clear on. However, a former UK ambassador to Uzbekistan, Craig Murray, actually has gone public saying that he knows who the leaker, not hacker, but the leaker was, somebody that he actually met in Washington, D.C., not a Russian. So we have a mix of stories. We also have a mix of theories that this is an internal leak. This is something that NSC whistleblower William Binney is very belief is that this is an internal leak, possibly by disgruntled NSC officials who do not want to see Hillary Clinton, who's mishandled everything and had all kinds of disasters happen as a result of at least her server open to the world, essentially, but by being unsecure. I mean, there's just a melange of theories out there and statements that are not being considered in this particular narrative. What is the elephant in the room is that the content of these emails is not being contested. In other words, the corruption, the collusion, the ugliness, the power madness revealed in the DNC in John Podesta's emails. None of this is being contested. And so if this content affected voters, which I believe it should have, I mean, why wouldn't it? That part is not actually being discussed. The substance of these emails may well have turned voters or may well have focused voters on other reports added to the picture and so on. But the idea that you negate these emails because supposedly they came from Russia or Russian sources is to negate any news story, is to negate the Vasilyev documents coming out of Russian government, to negate the Watergate story as coming from a disgruntled, very high up senior FBI official, is to negate any number of information sources, or rather the substance of any number of leaks that come from an array of sources. I mean, it's kind of a crazy story to run with. And the intensity and also the gaps that are supposed to also follow along with the intensity in terms of not considering the substance and so on, really should make people extremely suspicious of the motives of the people who are pushing the Russian influence story. And I would just add to that these consistently, in almost every instance, are the same people who would not admit a Russian conspiracy if they were handed surveillance documents, if they were shown photographs. These are the same people that denied all manner of espionage, of orchestrated, documented Soviet conspiracy, Soviet American, Cuban American, all manner of espionage and intelligence plotting, even when it's documented. These are the same people who will cry red baiting and McCarthyism when one even broaches the subject of Soviet subversion or communist subversion, or any kind of subversion for that matter, including Islamic subversion. These are the same people who want to erase our minds when it comes to being open to documented or documentable acts of intelligence war against our nation going back over a century. And now, on the basis of no forensic evidence, none, they have constructed the most baseless conspiracy of all in order to make a political point. And I think the politicization here of the CIA as our leading intelligence agency is perhaps the leading edge into what's really going on.
So the truth of these, the truth with regard to these emails, and I saw John Podesta's piece that he wrote protesting the breaching of his email. This is a very strange thing, as you say, that they're not contesting that what these emails say is what they actually wrote. And there's a lot of disturbing things in those emails, very disturbing things. I mean, the whole Pizzagate scandal came out of those emails. The whole picture of Hillary Clinton as sort of a nasty person who is not at all warm-hearted or kind or any of this, who has very poor judgment and so on. This all came out of these emails. And so this is not contested. But
Right.
the fact that the Russians leaked the emails somehow, hacked them, and then leaked them, and then that changed the outcome of the election. This is very strange to me in a number of ways, because Hillary Clinton was a person who really helped the Russians over and over again. Isn't that true?
Well, that's one of the other major pieces of this. Hillary Clinton, and for example, another uncontested fact is that the Democratic National Committee was rigging the election, or rigging the primary campaign for Hillary, to the detriment of her most important challenger, Bernie Sanders. That's another piece of this that's not contested. John Podesta's interest in essentially subverting the Catholic Church is not contested. I mean, there's just endless horrific revelations coming out of this, showing just the utter corruption of these people trying to seek the White House. As to your question, yes, this is the other piece of it. Not just Hillary Clinton, but John Podesta also have had very close ties with Russia. The Obama administration and Hillary Clinton, as its foreign policy official, leading foreign policy official, have presided over this massive technology transfer to Russia in something known as the Skolkovo project. This was something initiated under Barack Obama. It is essentially just served as a magnet for Western high technology companies to come into Russia and essentially work on civilian technological development that people have documented is also dual military use in many instances. This is something that has kind of a scandal that's evolving in slow motion. This was broken, I believe, by Peter Schweitzer, who's done so much breaking of this kind of news throughout this period, including his very famous book, Clinton Cash, about the Clinton Foundation, which is part of this Russia story, because we go back to the sale of the Canadian tech uranium company, or energy company, Uranium One, which had in its portfolio something like 20 to 25% of American uranium stock. This was sold under the Obama administration. It required the approval of various departments of the government, including the State Department. And the place where this becomes extremely even more troubling than just the transfer of American uranium stocks to Putin's ownership is the documented fact that $145 million have entered into the Clinton Foundation coffers from people associated with Uranium One. Not all on one day, and not even all after this sale, but over a period of time, these people associated on the board and so on with Uranium One have been massive contributors to the Clinton Foundation. This is very, very troubling. There's a separate financial connection between John Podesta and Russia that has yet to enter mainstream consciousness, again, broken by Peter Schweitzer in a remarkable study online called From Russia with Money. And in the course of this monograph, he discusses how it was that John Podesta, while serving as a counselor to the White House, up to the State Department of the Obama-Hillary Clinton administration, entered on the board of a company. It's actually a sort of a trio of companies known as Joule Unlimited, or other Joule companies, Joule, which is an energy company that has also on its board the chairman of the Russian state agency, Rusnano. It has also on its board another Russian oligarch who has financial connections to kind of a network of companies that end up financing John Podesta's think tank that he served as for many years as the chairman of, Center for American Progress. This has often been described as the administration in waiting, assuming the Democrats would have won. So you have, and it came out from WikiLeaks during the campaign in October, that not only obviously Podesta was paid on this board by this company with very close Russian ties, he also owns 75,000 shares of common stock. This is deeply troubling, and it is the height of audacity, at least, to see him coming forward now to denounce this completely evidenceless conspiracy that's supposed to involve Donald Trump becoming president on Vladimir Putin's say-so. So the idea is that Russia, in the person now personally, Vladimir Putin, essentially passed massive amounts of information from the DNC and John Podesta to WikiLeaks, which was released, thereby causing 20,000 people in Alabama to come out and hear Donald Trump, and then many, of the majority to vote for him in that contest, and 30 other American states where Donald Trump won. He won 31 states in this election, thereby causing all of those people on Putin's orders to go and vote for Donald Trump. It's truly staggering, because they're not even saying that these are forgeries. They're saying that it's fake news. This is the current catchphrase, simply because they insist, they declare based on no evidence, that Vladimir Putin is responsible for this information, even though they're responsible for the information. The DNC and John Podesta and all their associates are the people who created this body of information that WikiLeaks published. A body of information that if we had a real press corps, we would have already known much of it as the course of journalism. But we don't have journalism, we have propaganda. So everything's upside down.
And by the same logic, the Pentagon Papers would also be fake news. And
yes, everything.
Woodward and Bernstein would have been fake news. I mean, everything involving corruption of the government could be called a Russian plot, or the corruption of the Democratic Party on the other side. I mean, even Nixon didn't make the claim that Watergate was some kind of communist plot.
Right, right. I don't know that we've ever seen this before. I mean, except perhaps in the Soviet Union. If you think back, we will see factual crises changed into something else. I mean, that is the MO of so much of the Soviet way. So it's very confounding, because again, the people crying Russian wolf here are people who never ever once cared. And this even includes to the point of during the Obama administration. If you remember at the beginning, we had the abrupt exposure and deportation, quick, before they could be debriefed, of at least 10, I've also heard 12, illegals, Russian sleepers who had been living and working and in place in the United States, and were supposedly, actually, according to Bill Gertz, a very fine intelligence reporter, were rolled up because one of these, thought to be Anna Chapman, was getting too close to an Obama cabinet member, which Bill Gertz reports, according to his sources, was Hillary Clinton. So again, and this was all in the New York area. We can look to the very fascinating noises coming out of Senator Schumer of New York in terms of looking at this same story, fake news now, quiet then. I mean, again, you're looking at black is white and white is black. And one wonders if anyone buys it outside of the Beltway of Washington. I don't know. I think it's very damaging over time, even if most Americans at first would say, this makes no sense. It's just a matter of the repetition of the big lie is the power of the big lie. And so this is a really nefarious kind of situation. And I would say that I'm not sure Donald Trump is responding to it in the smartest way. Now, it could be he's been basically just saying this is ridiculous. And it could be that in this, I keep thinking that it's possible that what he's doing in this interim period until he's actually inaugurated and sitting inside the White House at his desk in the Oval Office, he essentially seems to be kind of lying low. He doesn't seem to be making much in the way of news. I mean, that's not entirely true if we look at his phone call with the Taiwanese leader and things like that. But in terms of dealing with internal politics, what to do with Hillary Clinton and so on, whether his administration will, as he certainly made very clear, would continue to have the FBI investigate various evidence of crimes and so on, and a special prosecutor and so on and things like that. But he kind of has been punting on this one. And I don't know if it's the way he's going to deal with it. I hope not. Or if he just kind of wants to move into the Oval Office before he deals with it as president, rather than get into a thing now when he doesn't have power, except the power of his expected power. So that would be my general discussion.
Well,
sorry,
go ahead, Italo, your question.
So essentially, they are not. They claim it's fake just because it was unjustly published.
Right, and supposedly Russian. It's fake because it's Russian.
So they're bending the meaning of the word. They call it fake just because they don't like it. Can you clarify to our Brazilian viewers what is exactly Pizzagate?
Yes, before I get to Pizzagate, because that will be a little bit of a talk. I think I was thinking about the difference between the big lie, which Stalin, according to Robert Conquest, the great historian of communist crime, the first big lie was the denial, pretty much successful denial of the terror famine in the Ukraine in the early 1930s. This was sort of, he considered it the very first big lie because it was the first state lie that was able to use the mass media of the day, the International Press Corps based in Moscow, controlled by virtue of its relationship with the Moscow censors. It wanted to continue to report in Moscow, and therefore it essentially colluded to reinforce Stalin's lie that there was no Ukraine terror famine, in which 10 million people were systematically starved to death by Stalin, by the communist regime. Fake news, you might say, is another iteration of the big lie. However, I think it implies that there is real news in a way that the big lie is more general. If there's fake news, there's real news. And what I think we're seeing, certainly in America, is a setup of vetted real news sources that will be able to, or certainly trying to, negate any reporting, any truth, any seeking of truth coming out of those outlets it deems to be fake. For example, the effort to taint WikiLeaks as all fake will continue. And one thing Julian Assange has made very clear, even if he keeps his sources hidden, nothing, he has, is it 1 million documents? Is it more than 1 million documents? Certainly hundreds of thousands of documents he's released in 10 years. None of them have been proven to be fake. They're all real. That's amazing. That is amazing. So if WikiLeaks is attacked as fake, independent outlets online attacked as fake, Breitbart News, which has been so important in this election cycle, becomes denigrated. Anyway, that's kind of just, you get the idea. Real and fake. It's a dangerous paradigm. Pizzagate, I think part of what's going on and part of what John Podesta being at the front of this pushback on the Trump election as this Russian construct has to do with massive effort to deflect from scandals such as what is been called Pizzagate, maybe not the best name. In the last weeks of the election cycle coming up to November 8th, there was a series of Podesta emails that attracted great scrutiny for these strange references to pizza that essentially internet sleuths, we don't know who they are, many of them are anonymous, some of them are not, have been trying to break down the language of these WikiLeaks involving pizza that seems to correlate with the language of pedophilia. And it sounds crazy. However, one of the roiling stories that never really broke out in a big way to really become part of election news in this cycle was the scandal involving the convicted pedophile Jeffrey Epstein, who has had great access and intimacy with many, many powerful people, including the Clintons, including Donald Trump for that matter, and people around the world, Prince Andrew and so on. He owns an island in the Caribbean that, what is it called? Pedophile Island? I forget what the nickname for it is, where people would jet in with him and have apparently orgies. I mean, it sounds crazy, but this is something that has been widely discussed, and much of it's been documented in terms of Bill Clinton on the flight log to Jeffrey Epstein's private island. Hillary Clinton, I understand, I'm not certain it's as documented as Bill's trips. Hillary Clinton, too, has been alleged to have gone to this island. So pedophilia is something that has been percolating on the edges of the election cycle all year, all the past year at least. Never really broke into anywhere in terms of election coverage. And I think that the Pizzagate, when you start looking at some of the evidence, some of the connections, feeds into this. One of the intimates, apparently, or somebody discussed and referred to in these WikiLeaks between Hillary Clinton, Huma Abedin, John Podesta also, and his brother, is a performance artist known as Marina Abramovich. Her performance art has all manner of satanic symbolism. You can look at it online. And the most disgusting, perverted kinds of performances and art. You start looking at her world and the world of these elites, which also include the Soroses, the young Soros son. It's Jeff and I have been discussing this over time. You find these art galas, these beautiful people. One of the things they seem to be doing that seems to be very much encouraged by this woman who comes from communist Yugoslavia originally, is to eat for dessert these replicas of naked women, full life-size naked women who turn out to be hacked up and served on plates as chocolate cake. It's a very perverted, disgusting kind of habit. So you start looking at that, again, broadening this context. So it's not just people making strange claims about the word pizza. There's this milieu among elites that is very disturbing, very twisted. And the fact that such people even have entree to political office holders is something that is very new in our experience. Once upon a time, such sordid things would not be mainstream, nor would a politician who wants to seek the highest office in the land be caught dead near someone such as Marina Abramovich and her extremely perverted output. The final piece I'll put on this, just so that the context is there, John Podesta's brother, Tony, who is a very, very successful Washington lobbyist who lives in a beautiful mansion in the best section of Washington, is famous for his art collection. Well, as we've been looking at this, we see that his art collection is populated by contemporary artworks by artists who are very, their subject matter too would be called, maybe by old-fashioned terms, to be perverted. You see children, you see teenagers, photographs, strange states of undress. You see art sculpture that surely looks to me as if it was based on a Jeffrey Dahmer, the cannibal murderer, a victim, hanging in the foyer of this home, the Tony Podesta home. This goes into John Podesta's world as well when you see in Time magazine, no less, a painting on loan from Tony in the campaign office in Brooklyn, New York, of John Podesta, Hillary Clinton's campaign chairman, depicting cannibalism. I mean, I'm not making any of this up. It sounds so crazy, and yet this is all documentable. I've said nothing outside documented fact. This is no conjecture. These are all things going on. The most sensational piece of this that no one in media is touching is that when you tie this in with pedophilia and international stories and national stories of kind of these rings that sort of pop up and these crimes that sort of pop up, can they be connected? Well, one of the oddest things I have ever witnessed is to look at, anyone can do this, is to look at the photographs generated by the police searching for the kidnapper of little Madeleine McCann, the British girl who vanished in 2007 from a resort in Portugal. The investigation has generated different suspects, persons of interest, and so on. The leading two look very much like John and Tony Podesta. That is a fact. It could be a coincidence, and yet it is a fact. Police-generated drawings that people have matched with pictures of Tony and John Podesta look startlingly alike, particularly John Podesta. It's just a very strange happenstance, if that's what it is. But to have the long, thin face of John Podesta and his brother's square face with the steel kind of charcoal hair, and to see those two faces reappear in police drawings is very startling once you fold in all of this other talk. It's talk at this point. There's one other part of it, which is people have homed in, and I think have taken it to an extreme that we cannot go to at this point, to a pizza place in Washington, D.C. called Comet Ping Pong. That's where we really get the word Pizzagate. Comet Ping Pong is a place that has great Democratic Party cachet. There have been at least one fundraiser held there for Hillary Clinton. John Podesta has been there, Tony as well. It has very weird and disturbing artwork, also depicting the kind of imagery and language you would not associate with a family restaurant, which is what it is supposed to be. The owner is a man named James Alefantis, and he lives with, his boyfriend is a very famous Democrat partisan attack dog, really, you could say, David Brock, very noted figure in Washington, a very important Democrat, very tied to Hillary Clinton as a vector of opposition research, let's say. James Alefantis was looked at in this Pizzagate period in the last couple of months because he had an open to the public Instagram account that was replete with photographs of babies with money, of babies and toddlers, and very inappropriate hashtags sent around with a little coterie of friends, some of whom remain anonymous, maybe all of them, but we have their hashtags to look at their accounts. Very strange people, child-sized coffins on one of the friends, a picture of a young man holding a beautiful little toddler in his arms, innocent, a father and son perhaps, and yet there's a photograph of a yellow beads around the neck of the man and the child, which in the parlance of pedophilia is supposed to refer to an act of pederasty. This is the kind of thing you look at, yes, it could possibly be innocent, but you look at it and you say, this is very strange, particularly for a single man who doesn't have children, an open homosexual man, having pictures of all these little children in strange depictions. There's one of adorable little baby with James Alefantis, own hashtag, calling it a hotard or hotard, which in the parlance of the street is supposed to be a hot retard. Who says that? Is the child being treated as a sex object? It certainly looks that way in these pictures. If that's the case, very disturbing. Wouldn't want my kids there. One of my daughters actually once worked there. Saw nothing, had a perfectly fine experience. But I'm just saying that on the surface, what people have seen, what people can put together with news accounts of all these other pieces with related personalities is, I think, the solid ground of Pizzagate. You don't have to go any farther to even know whether crimes have literally been committed to know that these are very twisted people across the board. And that in itself, particularly when you throw in the Anthony Weiner scandals, the husband of Hillary Clinton's top aide, Huma Abedin, who's been caught sexting, sexually engaging minors online, who has a laptop that was taken at one point late in the campaign that apparently included all manner of state emails and rumored terrible other things that the FBI should surely, or NYPD should surely continue to investigate. Somehow Anthony Weiner doesn't look like the outlier he always did when you put it into context with all of these other strange and disgusting pieces of the story. So that's a very long answer to your question, but that's where I am in terms of my understanding of what's solid in Pizzagate.
Yeah, that's a good summary of a very complicated subject. I mean, and I might add, what really kind of surprises me is here we had a week and a half before the election this Wienergate thing, this Anthony Weiner thing with the NYPD, and then a few days before the election, it's like disappears. It's not
Right.
relevant. The FBI drops the case again against Hillary Clinton, and we hear that the cops were pressured by the Justice Department. Do you want to comment on that at all?
Well, yes, this was a very important. I'm glad you brought that up because we were looking, we were shocked, and then, as you say, the matter was closed off. There was an interesting intervening piece of it, which came from Eric Prince, who was the founder of Blackwater, the security company in Iraq. He's very noted. His sister is now a member of the Trump administration. From what I understand, Ann DeVos is his sister, the new Secretary of Education. I believe that's correct. But what he did was he went on Breitbart Radio and discussed this at length and discussed the evidence that he believed or he had heard from his sources in NYPD that were on the Weiner laptop. And it almost felt like a push to bring NYPD or others familiar with the investigation forward to carry the story forward. I think it was a big push that went nowhere. And one thing we did hear was that, as you say, people were being pressured with indictment relating back to other police issues and so on. If that's true, that in itself requires an investigation. When I think about Trump taking office, it's almost like it would be, in a way, when Boris Yeltsin comes to take office after the dissolution or fall or reconstitution of the Soviet Union, whatever we want to call it. But when that government officially ended and he comes in, regardless of who Boris Yeltsin was working for or what his aims were, when he walks in the door, apparently turning the page, he confronted this massive toxic waste dump of corruption and death. And in many ways, I feel like Donald Trump is doing the same in walking in the door on this vessel of secrets and corruption and collusion party to party that has gone on unaddressed, that was supposed to continue uninterrupted with a change of captain only in the person of Hillary Clinton. It didn't matter who she was just going to continue. It could have been Jeb Bush. All of this would continue on. And that this is why it's such an opportunity for the American people and wider world to have this history aired and to have this corruption exposed. And that's what we don't know. If there really need to be a Donald Trump at every agency. I've come to the conclusion that there are not enough people of requisite experience to man the government and do what needs to be done. You need someone who's a patriot, which I believe Donald Trump to be, and who has good instincts about saving the country. They don't really need more. They really need to walk in as citizen bureaucrats or citizen secretaries, as opposed to machine politicians, and just say, what has been going on here all this time? Start opening the windows. And it almost sounds too good to be true, but it certainly starts with our most immediate past in terms of watching what WikiLeaks has presented to us on a platter as a point of public knowledge. We still, it's interesting. I saw this in a piece I read yesterday. We still don't actually, if WikiLeaks was a Russian hack, why didn't the Russians release any of the 33,000 emails Hillary Clinton destroyed? I mean, this is still hidden somewhere. Somebody's got that, most likely the NSC, I would also imagine. We have to start by just letting the sunshine in. And it's all very well to say that. I don't know that will happen. A lot will depend on whether Jeff Sessions becomes Attorney General, who the FBI director is. My vote right now would be for Rudy Giuliani. I think that would be a very good place to start. They really need to accept all the resignations that customarily come to the president's desk of all the chiefs at these various bureaucracies. They really need to accept them. But then who do they put in there? They really need people. I would like to see a Sarah Palin come into a position of authority. Somebody with instincts, not prior masters, not a vested interest in letting the party continue, and I mean party, small p, the corruption continue. This is really where we are, and it's a big if as to whether we really will get to what we need to get to. And I don't know that Donald Trump is completely aware of these things.
And the fake news, like with the Ukraine famine, there is no famine. There's just some starvation. I think is the
starvation associated with malnutrition.
Right, malnutrition. There's just some malnutrition is all, and it's not a problem, and it's not an indictment of the Soviet system. We're not murdering people on purpose. And you see, it's interesting when this fake news, when the claim that something is not real comes out. You know, in this context, that it's really real, and it's big, it's a huge thing, and there's an evil here they have to absolutely cover up. They have to absolutely deny that there's anything to it. And so we hear fake news. I mean, isn't that really the reason why we're hearing this?
I think so. I think it's, I made a list actually before I, I have to pick up my spectacles before I came on, because really this has been driving me crazy, the whole fake news eruption. And I realized, first of all, I've been a journalist for 30 years. And first of all, going back to the very beginning, I always had a fascination with the media, with what they used to call media bias, the way the press, 99.9% liberals and others on the left, misreported, unreported, underreported, skewed stories. This fascinated me. I loved going and looking at facts and looking at how they would be convoluted to the public. And this was just really kind of my entree into journalism. I often did media criticism along these lines, in as well as other tasks. And then when I worked on my last book, American Betrayal, which really, I always thought of it as a history of big lies, which have been taught to us as truth, taught not just, this big lies are not just phenomena of totalitarianism. I discovered in the way I was thinking this through, it came just as much from the censor's office in the West. It came just as much from government control of news, of power people's control of information, and destruction of those who tried to tell the truth all along. And so you see that really, in a sense, this collusion of big lies. You can't have the Ukraine terror famine be a big lie unless you have cooperation in the New York Times, which is where we get the very famous Walter Duranty, whose Pulitzer Prize stands. The New York Times has never returned it. He got it for covering the fake famine in Russia. I mean, he got it for his Russian coverage, which included a big lie. It is the New York Times then, it's the New York Times today, and the Washington Post and these other big media. But when you go back and you look, it's kind of like you have to start looking at everything in this way. Pearl Harbor, a sneak attack, that's what we're taught. Well, the more I study Pearl Harbor, the more I learn that there were numerous people around the world in different countries, Holland, the UK, breaking the code, America as well, breaking the Japanese code, knowing about this what was going to happen. The spy rings working in Tokyo and Washington, D.C., run by Moscow. There was so much knowledge about what was going on, and yet to this day, we know it as a sneak attack. Remember, Mao was presented to us by the same media as an agrarian reformer, the biggest communist killer of history. The same thing, you can just go on, but the POWs, MIAs of America, who never came home, and we were told they all came home. This is another piece of fake news, big lie. Obama's birth certificate. We haven't talked about Obama's birth certificate. However, it's fascinating to note that this week, Sheriff Joe Arpaio, Arizona Sheriff, Maricopa County, Arizona Sheriff Joe Arpaio, a major Trump ally, and a 8-time elected sheriff, a former federal drug official as well in Washington for many years, a very substantive person, a very controversial person because the left hates him, someone who tried to actually enforce immigration law before Donald Trump came along and made it popular. He has been overseeing a cold case posse, they call it, to look into the veracity of Barack Obama's birth certificate that is on the White House website as an online PDF. This has been going on for 5 years. And we could talk for a whole show about it. But I will just note that this past week, Sheriff Joe Arpaio's cold case posse had a press conference, a very substantive press conference that brought out the evidence that was concurred on by 2 sets of investigators, a document examiner in Hawaii of long career and a court-approved document examiner by the name of Reed Hayes, and an Italian digital forensic laboratory known as 4Lab. They both concluded that the evidence the posse had gathered, which we can discuss sometime, indicated that this online document is a forgery. This has not been reported. In terms of what they discovered, in terms of what this might mean, it's a huge story. I consider it the greatest fraud in American history, this particular crime, apparent crime, uninvestigated crime. And when it was reported in the most sneering, scoffing terms. So we're watching the generation of fake news about something very, very real, about something that bears examination. As Sheriff Joe Arpaio said, Congress had hearings on underinflated footballs related to a scandal in the National Football League recently. They can surely have hearings on what is apparently, according to experts, a fraudulent birth certificate presented by the President of the United States to the world.
And that would be a really big thing if it turns out to be true. I mean, it would be huge news.
You know, you can hardly even, I was actually sort of thinking about, imagine in a world where this was reported, what it opens up. I mean, I was covering it as best I could in terms of covering the various actions along the way, court challenges and so on, as a columnist coming in and out of the story for years. And very often my columns were spiked by some of my subscribers. The Washington Examiner, for example, did not want to hear about such things. The story was scoffed at consistently and made toxic. And I so respect Sheriff Arpaio, Mike Zullo, his lead investigator, and the others in this group that have gone forward and came out again, because it's an accident, really, that they did. No one should have stood up to do this. Who could do this? I can't do this. It takes at least someone with the kind of authority Sheriff Joe Arpaio has to generate a cold case posse and go forward and so on. The people who devoted their time and energy to it, unusual. We shouldn't know anything about this, and it's a mistake. It's a mistake in the annals of court history of the controllers of narrative that we even have the evidence we do. And instead of clasping it as precious gold, it is ignored and or denigrated in incredibly dismissive fashion. So this is where we are in America today. I mean, this is and I would add that Obama's birth certificate was a great interest to Donald Trump back in 2011, I believe it was. It was 2010 or 2011. I'm blanking. I think it was 2011.
Yeah, I think it's 2011. Yes.
And,
yeah.
and that was the point at which Obama produces, or his lawyer goes to Hawaii to get a copy. We never actually see the birth certificate in situ, which would have ended all the controversy if a camera had gone in with a person into the Hawaiian Board of Records and actually just looked at the 1961 volume and actually snapped a snap, right? Taken a picture for the world. We didn't have to go through this. But we have this rigmarole. We have one reporter in all of the world who has touched it, which is Dakota Meyer of NBC. Is that her name, Dakota? Anyway, I'll get her name. But one reporter was allowed to touch the copy. Anyway, the whole thing was smelled to high heavens, and Donald Trump was quite interested. The birth certificate appeared. Osama bin Laden was killed about a week later, which really just ended the whole issue. So this the number of secrets, the number of people involved in keeping the secrets, and that really includes any office holder, it includes all of the media. Everyone is vested in silence. And that's why the outsider who comes in, like Donald Trump, outside politics, outside Washington, with nothing to lose, he can go right back to his world unharmed, which has always been his, I think, most liberating feature all along. Is he gonna be Cassandra? Is he gonna open the box? There's so much to open here. You really need an American Truth Commission.
Yeah, Italo, did you have any thoughts?
How do you see that the American population is responding to this issue? Trump was elected despite of the media. So, are the truth coming out?
On
Of them? Are the about the Obama certificate and the Pizzagate, everything that they are trying to frame as fake news?
Not really. I think they've been quite successful at marginalizing these stories. Certainly, Pizzagate is pre-investigation at this point. People have pulled up what's open. They pulled up the open records they could find, and tried to create the context for understanding what may well be going on. If I were, had power, I would call up the FBI sex crime unit and say, take a look at this. What do you think? What do we do next? So Pizzagate is in early stages. Mm-hmm. The birth certificate has been debunked by experts so often. It was already proven to be fraudulent years ago, before in the 2012 election cycle. We had a lot of attention on it. There were many court challenges in the individual states at the point at which Obama was to go on the ballot. This was the prime moment for challenges, and they were not covered. I was able to watch some online because they go on and they're part of a record. I covered a few myself in my column. For example, New Jersey had a very interesting court challenge whereby the judge was essentially coaching Obama's lawyer, because remember, he paid for lawyers in all these instances. I don't know what sum of money. I would imagine it would have to be a considerable sum of money to contest all of these challenges or to fight them off. They determined that in New Jersey, you actually don't have to prove who you are to go on the ballot. And that was one answer. And indeed, his lawyer said, you could be Mickey Mouse. That's a quote. In Georgia was quite interesting. Georgia had another challenge. The judge actually held Obama and his lawyer in contempt of court. That's a big deal. No coverage. And in that case, someone brought forward, and it entered into evidence, that Barack Obama's Social Security number does not pass E-Verify, which is our system of verification of Social Security numbers. It's supposed to be used by employers to prove your citizenship. Well, his doesn't pass. It's a Connecticut. It has a Connecticut identifying prefix, the state of Connecticut. He never lived in Connecticut. He has nothing to do with Connecticut. That's a little weird. So his lawyer says, there's nothing in the Constitution that requires the president to participate in Social Security. That was his argument. That was the legal argument. You're looking at this thinking, oh, this is crazy. This is absolutely mad. No coverage. So in terms of what the American people know, it's very little, because they have been successfully convinced that to challenge the veracity of this document is to be a birther, which is a very bad word. And similarly to what we're watching today, if you're a birther, quote, you believe Obama was not born, or Obama was born in Kenya, or you believe Obama was born X, it has nothing to do with where he was born to challenge his birth documents or the absence of documentation of who he is. We don't have most identifying documents that presidents release from even his Senate records, his state Senate records, to his baptism certificate, to his marriage paper. There's no paper trail on this guy except what he's released online. As far as I think that's correct. Maybe 2 documents, both of them to investigators, certain investigators, look fraudulent. That's all we have. When John McCain was challenged, he basically dumped his paper on the press and said, "You guys sort it out." That's one good thing about John McCain, but I mean, that's how a normal person would respond. He's hidden everything. He's closed everything. We don't know his education records. We don't know his test scores. We don't know how he did, in law school. We don't know anything. We don't know really where he went to school. There's missing gaps on his education years in college and so on. Anyhow, it's something that has become so toxic that people shy away from it. Even people you think would be interested. I mean, I talk to people, and some people, their eyes sort of glaze over if you mention it. Others will say, "Oh yeah, it is fraudulent." And you say, "Well, why don't you do something? I mean, why don't you?" It doesn't really go very far. I'm afraid that with this Russia story, they're trying to create the same thing so that certain vectors of information, I don't know if they can really harm WikiLeaks. It's pretty big at this point, but others will be similarly denigrated. So something coming from a source will be suspect. When you control so much media, and I would say even outlets like Breitbart has not covered the birth certificate. That's something they will not cover. They have not covered. They didn't cover the press conference this week. So there are areas that seem to be minefields, even for journalists that you feel are trying to give you a bigger picture. It's kind of where it is. So it really are people online who are interested, and that's probably a relatively small number, and certainly no politician will touch it. And it's the responsibility of politicians. Why do you swear an oath to the Constitution? That's where we are. So they've been very successful in locking these things down.
And of course, anybody who dares to talk about some of these subjects, to act as if there is something worth looking into, gets completely berated as a dingbat or a wingbat,
Personally.
I mean, it's you're afraid to say that. Wait a minute, that birth certificate. There's something funny about it. I'm not saying, like you say, I'm not saying that Barack Obama was not born in the United States. It's just there's something wrong with this thing.
There's something wrong with it. And, it also goes back to the idea of destroying the concept of natural-born American, which is a constitutional requirement to be president and vice president. Frankly, I mean, I've studied it a lot over time, and the strongest argument I have found is that he actually is not a natural-born American, even if his birth certificate was perfect, because his father was not American. I mean, end of story in terms of a very broad understanding of natural born as a designation. Similarly, Senator Ted Cruz, not natural born. It's just the way it is, but people try to erase that whole concept. And then on top of it, we have this whole birth certificate drama whereby the Atlantic Monthly, for example, dismissed Sheriff Arpaio's information as essentially a racist attempt to destroy the first Black president, which is usually the go-to emotional argument that if you look at something like this, it's even worse than being a dingbat. You are a racist. And, I would say, well, let's just look at his white half, his mother's side, and she signed that birth certificate too, as well as his African father. I mean, we don't have to even look at that. We can just look at that side of it. But about that argument, of course, I'm just being facetious, but it's very similar to where we go back to, which I think is the Rosetta Stone of everything, which is our false understanding of what Senator Joseph McCarthy was doing and accomplished in his short career before he died at age, I believe, 47 in 1957 or 8. And we have no understanding that he and his committee exposed 50 and more communist Soviet agents and Fifth Amendment cases in the course of his very short investigations, really, when you think about it. He was just working for a couple of years there to expose secret covert communists under discipline from Moscow inside the US government on the taxpayers' payroll. I mean, this is what he was all about. And he was very successful. And he was demonized and destroyed more than any other figure in American history for attempting to protect us. We still don't understand what he did as a people. I mean, we do. Probably many of your viewers understand that he was doing legitimate investigations, along with many others in Congress, in the House and Senate. Both political parties were looking at this massive infiltration of communists that had occurred, particularly in the 1930s and 40s. And we, to this day, will not acknowledge that this happened. And in a sense, this is really where the blindfold starts, in my view, in terms of why we're so bereft of understanding what's going on today. We have erased, and this is something Jeff has written about, we've erased the whole concept of there being an enemy inside the wire, of being a domestic subversion force inside the country. And this is essentially keeping us blindfolded and unable to really appreciate what's going on today, which I would say I don't have a snap judgment of clarity to understand what's going on today, but you certainly get a feel for what is going on, and you see the patterns repeat, and you really have to go back to who benefits, what's really at stake, who's protecting what, who really is who really has Russian links, and all the rest, to really kind of unpack the story and realize what we're looking at is, many have called it already, a soft coup spearheaded by the CIA to destroy the Trump presidency, to undermine it at the very least, to attenuate his mandate to do the revolutionary things he must do to carry out his promises.
Yeah, I agree with that. Joseph McCarthy, what's interesting is that they destroyed Joseph McCarthy. If any journalist was trying to say that the Ukraine famine was real, they would get a lump for
They
it.
did. Mm-hmm.
Back in the 30s. There was this kind of political correctness back then of what you could say and you couldn't say, and there were certain truths that if you said them, your career might be over, that would be it for you. And we're in a similar position now. You can't question certain things, you can't bring up certain things. And when you talk about the kind of people that McCarthy was investigating in the 1950s, those are the same people who are crying Russian wolf now.
Yes.
If McCarthy were here, he would be investigating Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama. He would be investigating the people around them, Valerie Jarrett, and so on. And he would be saying, look, there's something here, there's something wrong here.
Well, yes. I mean, I think that, but here's where we are. I believe it was Paul Kengor who exposed the fact, this is not theory, the fact that Valerie Jarrett, who's Barack Obama's very senior advisor inside the White House, David Axelrod, who was his guide to the presidency, I believe he was campaign manager in the first run, and Barack Obama share communist forebears who worked together in Chicago. Frank Marshall Davis, a hardened communist operative identified by the FBI and listed on an arrest list in the event of war with the Soviet Union, was Barack Obama's early mentor. He worked with Valerie Jarrett's in-laws, relatives, a generation back, who had connections at least to one known Soviet agent that I'm aware of. This is in released declassified documents I'm referring to. And David Axelrod was mentored by a man named Cantor, who was someone involved deeply in communist operations in this country, as identified by the House Un-American Activities Committee. they worked together in Chicago. This is fact. The news comes out and it just sits there completely unappreciated. It's almost like people have lost the capacity to even conceive of what it might mean that this troika, let's call it a troika, of forebears produced the people at the highest pinnacle of power in America. And yet we never discussed Russian influence, communist influence inside the Barack Obama administration, except on the margins. I mean, this again was something very marginal. That's part of the reason it's so destabilizing to watch the media today doing all these somersaults over Russian influence based on no records, no FBI declassifieds, no KGB decrypts, nothing, just their say-so. And it becomes very clear that it's an information operation designed to destroy. This certainly is my read. I would love to see investigations into this. I don't see that as a threat. I see that as a beautiful promise. Open it up, however, open it up. Make sure that you start looking at Uranium-1. You start looking at John Podesta's Joule connections. You start looking at what the Clinton, Obama administration did. Heck, go back to the Clinton administration. Look what they did in terms of bringing along the Chinese. We did have investigations into that back in the 90s and learned that essentially Bill Clinton modernized the Chinese military in exchange for campaign funds. Is that a fair assessment? I think so.
Yeah, it is a fair assessment.
Go back to what was Bill Clinton doing when he was a student in Moscow during the Cold War. I mean, these are real things that happened that this same media had no interest in acknowledging, understanding, ever hearing about, or letting anyone talk about. So again, that's part of the reason this becomes so clearly a big fake, a big phony, a head fake on us. And that's why this whole fake news phrase is so disturbing. It's so, probably in some ways, if it's successful, it would be the biggest disinformation I can think of in a very, very long time. But my question always becomes, where did it start? Where's the orchestration? We see orchestration. Who is the source of it? Is it John Brennan at the CIA? Maybe. We found out also in this campaign cycle, he voted for the Communist Party as a young man and still was allowed into the CIA on discussing this with his, in the course of his vetting. Who is this person? We have a very credible report that he also secretly converted to Islam from a former FBI agent named John Guandolo. Who is this person? What's going on? You know, and what are the layers he's leaving behind? Because I assume on January 20th, at least he's gone. So what's going, you know, this is very troubling, and this is what Trump is walking into. Again, how much does he understand? How much do the people around him understand? Open question.
And I should say that what it is that the public has to understand is that the history, and your book American Betrayal goes into what is the necessary background to basically understanding these issues, because it's, if you don't understand how the communists worked in the 30s, how they were connected to Russia, how that influenced national policy, how it influenced an administration, two presidents at least, how that was we never came to grips with it, and how we have the same pattern today. It's the exact same identical pattern, and how Russian active measures works, how the infiltration works together with the active measures, how the big lie technique works. I mean, the public, these are complicated things, and the public just doesn't have the background to understand it.
No. And, you know, again, you look at the dissolution of the Soviet Union. If the USSR were in existence and a former KGB colonel named Vladimir Putin was at the helm, we would be able to make the link pretty clear. At least we would be able to, in this conversation, make the link pretty clearly and say, aha, we're looking at another go-round of disinformation coming from Moscow, disseminated through the US media and so on. But we have Russia today. We have supposedly the Soviet Union is gone. supposedly according to the very smartest people. There's no more subversion coming out of Moscow. So we have sort of a broken chain in terms of our former understanding of how it worked. Is it still coming out of Moscow? Is it coming out of Brussels? Is it coming out of Washington? Did they move? Is the center here now? I just constantly wonder these things in terms of trying to understand the chain of command, because this is not something that just happened. People didn't just start talking about fake news. Obviously, if Hillary Clinton had won, this move on fake news would not be here. We would not have her talking about how Vladimir Putin's personal beef with her led to her loss. We would not have WikiLeaks suddenly denigrated as a Russian tool of Vladimir Putin's strategy and so on. All these things would not be going on. And so you just wonder, where was the meeting? Was it George Soros's big meeting in Washington in November, or the Democracy Alliance, this group of leftist billionaires that come in? Who's doing this? Where's the brain trust on the fake news? I have no idea. I mean, it's one of these things where you really need investigation. You really need to start having some authorities look at, yes, the subversion of our system in terms of just trying to understand the information chain. And I don't know how you do that. We don't have a Congress that is interested any longer. They have been successfully neutralized by fear of being called McCarthyism or McCarthyite, just as people will not look at the birth certificate for fear of being called birther. That's why Sheriff Joe is so precious. He's 80-something years old, and he fights for honesty, for trying to get to the bottom of something. That's a rare American. He's as rare as Donald Trump.
Yeah, that is pretty rare. Well, I want to thank you for speaking out and saying these things, because it's incredibly refreshing to hear this and hear an analysis that includes all the facts, even the incorrect ones. We lost Italo here in the connection, but I just want to thank you, Diana, for coming on.
Oh, well, thank you for having me. It's very helpful speaking with you.
Yeah, and it's been great to hear these things, to put everything into kind of perspective. So I want to thank the listeners. If you like the show, click the button there saying that you like, the thumbs up button, and we will be back after Christmas. Everybody, Merry Christmas or Happy Holiday, Happy New Year, and we'll catch you next Update Brazil. Thank you very much.